University of Alaska Disability Services Annual Conference. All access, all the time. Sharing space together. When we come together online, we often don't feel connected to our land and can mistakenly imagine ourselves as disconnected from physical space. In reality, we join these virtual sessions from offices and homes built on the traditional, unceded lands of Indigenous tribes and peoples across North America. Disability Services would like to express gratitude for access to this beautiful, majestic land and for its caretakers. We also acknowledge that our shared virtual space exists because of physical infrastructure. Zoom servers connect us based on resources and availability. When you join us virtually, you're borrowing resources from other communities that make this sharing possible. If you don't know the Indigenous history of the land you occupy and would like to learn more, please visit native.lan.ca. The University of Alaska acknowledges the Alaska Native Nations upon whose ancestral lands our campuses reside. University of Alaska Anchorage.
Dena'ina, Atnadine, Alutiiq, Sugpiaq, Chugachmute, and Eyak peoples.
University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Dina people of the lower Tanana River.
University of Alaska Southeast.
Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian peoples.
Welcome to the session.
The first session this morning is titled UA Accommodations Process. This is a behind-the-scenes look at the accommodations process from start to finish. Today's presentation will be given by Amber Cagwin, who is the Director of UAF Disability Services, Ann Lazenby, Director of UAA Disability Support Services, and Jenny Malika, a specialist at UAS Disability Services. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amber to get us started with the UA accommodations process.
Thanks, Marissa. Welcome, everyone. Again, my name is Amber Cagwin, and I'm the Director of Disability Services at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I'm so excited that you're all joining us today and to be here with my colleagues across the state and the campuses. So welcome, thank you. So today we're going to be going over the UA accommodation process for students who are registering for services with disability services on their campus. This is kind of a behind the scenes look at the accommodations process from the beginning to the end. So with me today is Ann Lazenby, Director of the Disability Support Services at UAA, as Marissa had mentioned, and as well as Jenny Malika, our Specialist for Disability Services at UAS. A couple of notes for everybody. We are not lawyers, so this is not legal advice. But we are presenting on the information that we have learned and collaborated together to develop processes and ways for students to work with the different campuses depending on their needs and make it so that as seamless as possible when students have classes on multiple campuses. Making sure that we are in compliance with the legal regulations, the university policies and procedures, state law, and meeting all of those needs. For our presentation style today, we are going to be reading everything on the screen and describing the images that are pertinent to the presentation that are provided in the slideshow. We also have interpreters for our program today and CART services. We have a Typewell that has joined us. So if you would like access to those, we have information that will go up in the chat and you can get a link to the captioning for today. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box during our presentation today, or you can ask after the presentation. You can also contact our offices with any questions as a follow-up if something doesn't occur during the session, but we're happy to answer questions as we go today. So what we'll be doing today is kind of looking at the purpose of accommodations, both the goals and the spirit of the law. And then we will take a deeper dive into how the process works, and both our policies and processes. And then we'll be looking a little bit at inclusivity and access as far as what can we all do to change how we approach accommodations and providing access to individuals with disabilities to our campus, our classrooms, and our course materials. The purpose of accommodations is a little bit different than what it is in high school. So if you have students that are coming straight from high school into college, there are some differences there. It's essentially we focus on equitable access in college. And one thing that is important for me to keep in mind when we're doing this work is that I'm not as knowledgeable as some are, and there's always something that comes up that I didn't realize before. And so it's really important for me to keep this quote in mind. Pablo Picasso at one point had said that there's only one way to look at things until someone shows us how to look at them with different eyes. And I think that's very relevant to the work that we do. As laws change, as new information becomes available, as technology changes, and as the needs of our students change. So in terms of equality, there's a lot of times we put tools into place that work for the majority of people, but it doesn't work for all people. On the screen is an image of 3 individuals who are standing outside of a fence at a soccer game, trying to watch the game. The fence is wooden, it's solid, and it's not able to be seen through. So you have to be able to look over the fence in order to see the game. The individuals in this image each are standing on a box. The one on the left is tall and is able to see over the fence. The fence comes to about their chest height. The person in the middle is also standing on a box, and the fence then comes to the person's neckline, so they're able to see the game. The third person is standing on a box, but unfortunately they're still too short to see over the fence, and so they aren't able to view the game. So in this image, it demonstrates everyone has an equal tool. You know, they all have the same item to use to see the game, but they're still not effectively able to participate or enjoy the activity that's happening beyond that fence. And so when we look at equity versus equality, which we just spoke about, equity is looking more at what the individuals need in particular to be able to actively participate or enjoy the activity. So in this image, we have the same 3 people standing at the same wooden fence, but the boxes have been rearranged so that now the person on the left doesn't have a box and they're still able to see the game. The person in the middle has 1 box, and again, they're also able to still see the game. And the person on the far right now has 2 boxes, which allows them to be tall enough to see over the fence to watch the game. Some people may need a different variety of tools or a different number of tools to be able to have the same access. And what we'd like to get to is a concept called universal design. And that's where we're able to find barriers that exist in our systems and remove them so that potentially individuals don't need additional tools to be able to enjoy or participate in activities. So in this image, we have the same 3 people standing at and watching the same soccer game, but instead of a large wooden fence that's not able to be seen through, we have a chain link fence, and everyone is able to either see over it or see through it, which then removes the need for the box that people were standing on in the previous images. So everybody can access the game without concern of being able to see it. So some statistics to think about. Nationally, 1 in 5 college students identify as having a disability. That's 20% of our student body is experiencing a disability. However, between 60 and 80% of students nationally don't actually contact their university services for accommodations. So at UAF, UAS, and UAA, we see that trend in our numbers. The percentage of the student body using services at UAF is about 4%. At UAS, it's roughly 5%. And at UAA, it's also roughly 5%. And the majority of the students that in that 5% that we work with, roughly 95% of our students have invisible disabilities. So it's not obvious that they may need assistance or that they may need accommodations in their classes until they request it specifically. I mentioned earlier that accommodations when students come to college are different than when they're in K through 12. In K through 12, the goal for students in the way that the laws are designed is for them to be successful in their programs, for them to complete their degrees or certificates, whatever the program is that's been set up for them, it's to complete and finish that. The school in K through 12 identifies students that they may believe need accommodations. And the teachers can even modify their curriculum. So not all students have to do the same level of work, the same amount of work, or the same type of assignments potentially. And individual standards can be applied to make sure that that student is successful in completing the program that they're working in. In college, however, the goal is access versus success. And this means that we need to make sure that students are able to participate in and get to the location of where their classes are located, whether it's being able to access the campus or the classroom itself that the class is taught in, being able to access the material in the course. It might need to be modified to allow them to listen to the material versus reading it. It may be that it needs to be converted to a different type of communication, such as using a Braille book versus a written book. It could be a variety of things that they are needing to be able to focus and enjoy the material that's being taught. They also need to be able to demonstrate their knowledge of the material. And so ensuring that they have access to communicate back with the instructor what they have learned in the course is really important as well. So students must self-identify as an individual with a disability and request accommodations. And that happens through our offices. So the Disability Services Office on your campus will work with that student to determine what accommodations are appropriate and they're qualified for, and put those into place with the assistance of the faculty in each classroom that student is in. If there are fundamental objectives and requirements for that course, regardless of a disability, they still have to meet that. There may be accommodations that can be put into place to help them achieve those goals and to meet those requirements. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. So how it works, our policies and processes as students request accommodations through our system. So from a legal standpoint, there are laws that have been established. Both federal, state, and actually local governments have put laws into place to ensure that individuals have access to their coursework if they have disabilities, and that our offices have to follow and make sure that we are in compliance with those laws through our policies and our processes and how we work with individual students. The UA policies have been developed in accordance with the regulations or the laws and regulations that have been set forth through the federal, state, and local governments. And our Board of Regents have developed those policies specifically for the UA system. It's the Policy and University Regulation 09.06. And that can be found. We have a link in our resource pages at the end. There's also our processes then that have been developed with both the law and the university policies in mind to make sure that we are meeting those, but also potentially and ideally meeting our best practices for how we interact with students, how we put accommodations into place. And those have also been developed through guidance from our professional standards and consultation with the other campuses within the system, so that we're consistent with how we put those into place. We can provide those accommodations throughout the system for students who are registering for classes on various campuses, and make sure that their experience is as consistent as possible as they move from one office to another to request accommodations for their classes on those campuses. Our accommodations are essentially a modification or service that gives a student with a disability an equal opportunity to benefit from the educational process. It can be useful to think of an accommodation as adjustments to how things are normally done. And in general, accommodations can be grouped into the following categories. It could be a change to a classroom environment or a task that permits a student with a disability to participate in the educational process. It can be the removal of architectural barriers. It could be a modification to a policy, practice, or procedure. It could be also a provision of auxiliary aids and services, or an adaptation or modification that allow a student to enjoy the benefits and privileges of the college's programs, services, and activities. And the accommodations don't lower the academic standards or compromise the integrity of an academic program. It simply provides a different way for them to interact with that coursework. So academic conduct and technical standards will always be maintained, and accommodations are provided at no cost for eligible students. So areas where disability services can provide supports, we can assist with access to campus events, whether it's for providing an interpreter or captioning services, or ensuring that the event is at a location where somebody with a physical mobility can access the space. We can provide supports in the classroom, and some of those can range from making sure that an individual with a hearing loss has access to a microphone and hearing loop system to be able to hear the instructor better. It could be note-taking services. Also, it could be interpreting services. There's a variety of things that we can do as far as the physical space. If a student needs a desk that's standing, we can assist them with those kinds of requests as well. We can assist with testing services, providing space for students who need to take an exam in a distraction-reduced environment, meaning that we've eliminated as much noise and visual distractions as possible. We can provide assistance with assignments in terms of making sure that they are set up in a way that they can access, the students can access them either through a screen reader or, for reading their textbooks, providing electronic textbooks. We can assist with housing accommodations as well. That might be an emotional support animal, or ensuring that student has close access to a restroom if that's something that they need, as well as with dining. So food allergies, things that are a concern for students who need certain diabetic requirements. We can assist with and working with the dining on campus to make sure that the food that they are able to get through the dining services offices are that meet their needs. And we can also make sure that they have access to their buildings and campus transportation if that's a need that we're seeing as well. And now I'm going to hand it over to Jenny so that she can take over and continue talking about our process.
Great. Thanks, Amber. I'm Jenny Malika. I'm from UAS in Juneau, and it's so great to see so many folks at this training. Of course, we think what we do is very important, and, access is a system-wide responsibility for all of us as staff and faculty. I'm also really grateful for this collaboration with UAF and UAA. It's been so positive for our students and really, really helpful to our offices here in Juneau. The shared resources have been really helpful for us. I get to talk about the nuts and bolts of DS and how we serve students, which brings us to registration, documentation, and welcome. Oh my. This slide is a quick overview of the process. The process is pretty simple. It starts when the student contacts DS. Students complete what we call a UA registration for accommodation form. And this is a form that's used at all 3 campuses. The student also needs to provide documentation of a diagnosed disability and then set up a welcome meeting and meet with DS staff. Once these steps are completed, we write a faculty notification letter, which notifies the faculty of the student's academic accommodations. Students do need to contact our office each semester to request their accommodations so that we can review their courses and to make sure that the accommodations they're requesting are appropriate, reasonable, and helpful for their courses. Students can register with DS and request modifications to their accommodations anytime during the semester. I have even registered new students, a week before finals. So starting the accommodation process. The process starts when the student contacts our office. So they're basically doing what Amber talked about. They are self-identifying as a student with a disability. Some students find us on their own. They may have had accommodations in the K-12 system or at another college. Other students are referred by faculty and staff. If a student asks you, you as a faculty member, as a staff member for an accommodation, or discloses that they have a disability or that they're experiencing issues related to a disability, please refer those students to our office. How that referral happens is up to you. You might just give the student contact information for DS. Here at UAS, I know down in the Student Resource Center, our counselors and some of our academic advisors have access to my calendar, so they might offer to just schedule a meeting with DS. Some faculty will get permission from the student to give us their contact info and we can reach out directly. On an important side note, if a student requests an accommodation directly to you, it's strongly advised that you have the student go through the DS office. Sometimes students will approach housing or faculty and just say, I just need this one thing. It's really in the best interest of faculty and the students for both compliance reasons and to ensure that the student is being fully supported in all of their classes and campus life. So I'm sure some of you as staff and faculty have been working with students who think, gosh, they seem like they might have a disability, or it seems like they might need support, but they have not directly disclosed a disability to you. And I know a lot of staff and faculty are unsure how to refer those students to our offices. In those situations, we ask that you just provide them a list of campus resources and of course include our office on there as well. It's really important that we never ask a student directly if they have a disability or ask for more information about their disability if they disclose one. It's really up to the student as to how much they want to share, and it's best handled by our offices. Lastly, again, this collaboration, we're really happy to say that with our work, once a student is registered with one of our D offices in the UA system, their accommodations will be accepted at all UA campuses. So if I register a student at UAS and they take a class at UAA, I just call Ann and let them know, and they do the same accommodations. So documentation is a really important part of what we do. Certainly, it's important that we verify that all of the students that we work with do have a disability. What documentation, what it usually includes and what we ask is that it's recent, between 3 to 5 years, that it should include a diagnosis of a disability or condition. And it should be from a provider that's qualified to make that diagnosis. We don't want something about a learning disability, from a physical therapist or something like that. The format can be in lots of different ways. It could be a letter from the provider directly saying that the student has a disability. It would need to name the disability. It's great if they also want to talk about how it impacts them, but like we said, as long as it has the diagnosis. We also have a disability verification form that students can give their healthcare provider to complete, and that can be really helpful. We also would accept documentation from a hospital or office visit that includes a diagnosis. The documentation doesn't have to be extensive or include the student's entire medical history. We just need something that has a diagnosis listed from a provider who, again, is qualified to provide that diagnosis. We do accept other things for documentation too. We accept letters from the VA that indicate a percentage of disability. We can take an IEP, which Amber talked about. That is the individual education plan that some of our students had in K-12, or a 504 plan, which is similar for medical issues in the K-12 system, as long as those plans include a diagnosis. And typically their diagnoses are from a school psychologist or a specialist that is qualified to provide that diagnosis. Documentation that's older from students, it might be 10 years old or 20 years old, for disabilities that don't change. Obviously, you don't go and get a new letter from your doctor if you use a wheelchair or if you're blind or deaf. And on that note, if a student has a visible disability, we don't even need them to provide documentation unless we need clarification on how the disability impacts their learning. But we usually can get this information directly from the student. When it comes to documentation, we really do try to be flexible and work with students on getting documentation. We understand that access to healthcare is limited in many of our communities, and often our students, due to socioeconomic reasons, may not have access to quality healthcare. The last thing we want is the documentation to be a barrier for a student with a disability, and them being not able to access their classes. You know, the pandemic has been a great example of this. The impact of COVID on the healthcare system has caused delays in obtaining healthcare and also just getting medical records. And we've been very aware of that from the beginning. And so what we usually do, like in the situation with COVID, or if we have a student who doesn't have a documentation yet, we do provide provisional accommodations. Students are often working with a provider but haven't received a diagnosis, or they're scheduled to meet with one of our counselors or health centers at some point in the semester. And then we can provide provisional accommodations while they're sorting out those details. Typically, provisional accommodations don't last more than one semester. We really do eventually need documentation. We do our best to make the process as least burdensome for the student as possible. And when they don't have documentation, we work with the student to help them get the resources they need to be diagnosed. So once the student has filled out the form and they get our documentation, then we schedule what we call a welcome meeting. And really, this is a really important meeting. It's an interactive process, which is really important in disability services. It's not us telling the student what they need. It's us working with the student and determining together what they need. It's really important that we get an understanding of what the student is experiencing. And it's essentially a conversation with the student about how their disability impacts their learning and access to other areas on campus, like events, dining, housing. And we want to make sure they're able to fully enjoy their classes and housing and utilize their meal plan. If there's transportation issues, how they get to their classes. We discuss any barriers related to their classes, their studying, and campus life. You know, as part of this interactive process, we determine appropriate accommodations. It is important to note that the accommodations we give have to be related to the student's disability. I'll talk about preferences in a little bit. When I talk about preferences, we're talking about a preference for an accommodation that they are eligible for, not just a preference. So there are times where we do have to tell students that they aren't eligible for a certain accommodation due to their disability. But whenever possible, we do use the student's preferred method for implementing accommodations. For instance, if we're working for a student who is blind, they may prefer Braille textbook versus an electronic text that would work through a screen reader. Or another example would be for students who need a reduced distraction environment during their exams, they may prefer noise canceling headphones over testing in a private room. We really do try to work with the student on what their preference is and what's going to work in that classroom environment and move from there. This slide shows just a few of the accommodations, some of our more common ones that we use with students, and I'll just kind of read through them. Sign language interpreters, transcription, note takers, or a copy of the lecture notes from the faculty. Sometimes these would be peer note takers that we hire. We also have some assistive technology that can help with note taking. Recording lectures, we also have some neat assistive technology for that. And I just want to put a plug in for another one of our sessions next Tuesday. There's going to be an assistive technology session that is going to be really neat. It's really fun to learn about different ways students can use assistive technology to study and to have access to their campus. And I personally sometimes use a lot of the assistive technology that I learn about. Test taking accommodations are really common, maybe giving an exam in an alternate format, extending the time that's allowed, a dictionary or a spell checker, unless of course the test is designed to measure spelling ability, providing a quiet room for testing in order to decrease auditory or visual distractions, and repeating instructions. There's some students who just need clarification on instructions. We have students who are hard of hearing who use listening devices. It might be a remote microphone system that the faculty member wears. Another important accommodation, like Amber talked about, is removal of architectural barriers. We need to make sure that we're providing appropriate seating option for students, installing lighting in classrooms to assist students with low vision, course substitutions and waivers, and written materials in alternate formats, such as large print, Braille, or electronic format that works with screen readers. One thing that we talk a lot about in DS is how the individualized process, the interactive process, and also that it's individualized. Determining accommodations is on a case-by-case process, and we cannot provide accommodations that fundamentally alter the course. We often have to be creative or research on how we can provide access to our students in unique situations. We come across a lot of them. That's another reason this collaboration with the other universities is so important. We often do case conferences when we have a unique situation, so we can find out if one of the other campuses have encountered this and what they did. And if none of the campuses have, we can discuss it as professionals and come up with an appropriate accommodation. But again, we will never do anything that would fundamentally alter a course. And so we always need to make sure of that. And we know that the fact that we don't use this cookie cutter approach, that it is unique and individualized, we know that can be a challenge for some of our faculty and staff at times, but our role on campus is to ensure our students have access to their campus and campus life. Things to consider: we listen to students' preferences. I think that's really important to know. If a student is able to receive an accommodation in a way that they're familiar with, we know that they're going to be more successful in their coursework. We trust the student and the experiences that they're sharing. We don't hold any judgment. We don't question whether or not they're being forthright with us. And we believe what they're telling us. I've experienced some really touching moments with our students, listening to their stories and just believing what they've told us. A lot of students who have disabilities have some negative experiences with systems or the school district. And we really want to be there for them and let them know that we do believe them and we do want to help. We talked about how important documentation is, but it's just provided as support. It's not evidence, and it doesn't need to be extensive. Again, we don't want documentation to be a barrier for one of our students with a disability to get services. We will ensure that we have some sort of documentation. But again, the important thing is that interactive process with the student. So information about the student's disability is not shared without the student's consent. That's really important. Everything we do is confidential. Some students are comfortable, very comfortable sharing information about their disability, but not all students are. So we only share information as needed. Our documentation follows FERPA, so it can be shared if it's educationally needed, but typically it's not needed. And we don't share anything about the disability unless we get permission from the student. There are times where we might suggest to a student that it would be good for their faculty or housing to know of their disability. A good example is our students who experience seizure disorders or epilepsy. They might have a seizure in class or in housing. And it's really important that instructor and staff know what to do in those situations. We say that accommodations are not retroactive, but there are exceptions to that. COVID again, students may experience a new symptom of their disability. They may have a flare-up of their disability. We have students who are diagnosed with new disabilities in the middle of the semester or who are hospitalized. So obviously a student who has a heart attack, we couldn't have planned for that. And so we may ask for retroactive accommodations in that situation. Accommodations can be modified, whether it's during the semester or at the start of a new semester, when we're looking at a new course that a person might be taking that are different than the style of courses that they were taking before, or again, it might need to be modified because of a flare-up of a disability or a new diagnosis. And we also do temporary accommodations. Obviously we have students have accidents. If somebody breaks their wrist and can't write, they are welcome to register with Disability Services so we can help them with some dictation technology or some sort of assistive technology so that they can get their written work completed. So that's it on kind of the nuts and bolts. I'm happy to answer questions now or at the end. I love answering questions, but for now, we'll turn it back to Amber.
Thanks, Jenny. And so we're going to look a little bit at inclusivity and access and what we can all do to kind of change up how we approach accommodations on our campus and be more aware of what our students may be needing. And so the biggest part for I think thing to do is to really make accessibility part of our conversations. Our campuses have all been working really hard to put a focus on diversity and inclusion and equitability. And that includes access to campus for those who have disabilities. So we should be talking about access. Ways we can do that. You can include in your syllabi and make part of the discussion when you're introducing your course with your students. Let them know what the resources are that are available on campus so that if a student knows somebody who may be struggling or they themselves are not sure that that's even an option on campus, it just increases awareness. We do hear from a lot of students that we first meet with that said, I've been a student here for 3 years and I never knew your office existed. So we're working to change that, but it's great to have partners in the classroom with our faculty that are also providing that information so the students are hearing it from multiple places. It's a great way to increase access also to talk with other faculty and instructional designers about what they're doing to make their classes more accessible. A lot of times we will have a student that registers for a class that wasn't really designed in a way that had full access. Maybe the documentation or documents that are up on the webs on the course aren't readable by a screen reader. And so we have to go back and do some work to make sure that that document is accessible by a screen reader. Or maybe the videos that were uploaded weren't captioned. And so we have to go back and kind of caption those videos and make sure that that's all set and ready to go. And it can create a little bit of a scramble at the very start of the semester to get things in place. So if we're designing our classes in a way that are accessible, it can prevent some of that last minute change of work and changing of what materials are on the site so that everyone can access the course. We should be talking about access with administrators and trying to encourage them to consider access when looking at enrollment. A lot of students will sign up for classes and register with our office, but they're finding it difficult to access the coursework, the campus. There might just be a barrier that's in place that makes them feel like, okay, maybe this isn't the right place for me, and they decide to go elsewhere. So keeping our students and retaining them from semester to semester is important for our administrators. So if they can put some investment into increasing access before the students get here, potentially that we can retain them and they can continue with us and be successful in their college career. Yes.
We have a question in the chat about specific language to put in a syllabus.
Sure. Essentially, having information in there about that you work with Disability Services Office and how to reach our office, that accommodations can be put in place for students who are working with our offices. And we can send out something that has some sample language to include, but really it's just making it known that our offices are available and that as faculty members, you work with our office on accommodations that are put into place.
I'm going to put a link to the UAA webpage that actually has some syllabus statements. And then I see
Great.
that somebody also posted for the UAS.
Perfect. Thank you. We also want to talk about access when we are having conversations on our campus about inclusivity and diversity. So as I mentioned, that is something that is being discussed regularly on our campuses now. And so making sure that access is part of that conversation is really important so that we are inclusive of individuals with disabilities as well. Another way to talk about access is when we're developing our policies and processes for campus. Are we putting barriers into place unnecessarily that may make it difficult for somebody who experiences a disability to access either a process or, a lot of times we'll create forms and require that students fill those out. Are we providing it in a way that is accessible through a screen reader? Is it something that is created in a way that will allow a student to submit it completely electronically using voice controls on a computer? Those are things that potentially our office can help with to review it or to get you connected with services that can ensure that those processes and policies are accessible. We should also be considering access on our campus when we're entering buildings or using campus facilities like restrooms and parking lots. Just keeping in mind, is this space accessible to somebody who maybe has a mobility disability or mobility impairment? Do we have adequate parking for in this area for individuals who have disabilities? When we are creating our coursework, our courses, and determining what software to use for our courses, is the software accessible? I know of a couple of software programs that were purchased by the university that it turned out weren't accessible. It couldn't be used with captioning. It couldn't be used with an interpreter. And even though we had purchased it, we weren't able to actually use it for the functionality that we wanted it for because it just was not accessible. So keeping that in mind when we're purchasing things or initially starting those processes, really can help in the long run and make it so that we aren't trying to change things up and fix things later down the road. We should be considering access when we're creating websites, making sure that our website is usable by a screen reader. Our DS offices on each of our campuses has gone through the process to purchase the Read and Write program for access for all of our faculty and students and staff to use on all of our campuses. And Read and Write has a screen reader function built in, and you can utilize that to read through documents or a web page to see if it's accessible by somebody who uses a screen reader, to see what that flow looks like and does it read the things that you want it to read. We have tools that are available and in place and can help you check to see how accessible something is. So we encourage you to check that out or talk with us about those things if that's something that you're needing to do. We should also be considering access when we're selecting our course materials. A lot of times course materials aren't available in electronic formats, or the electronic format is only accessible for small portions of the information at a time. And so as faculty members, as you're looking at the course materials that you want to select for your course, figuring out, is there an accessible version that's available through the publisher? Can I talk with them, my publisher or the author, about, and it's typically the publisher, about how they make it accessible for individuals? And does that work with the different screen reader programs? And connect us with the publisher, and we can assist to see if it's accessible for our students. One last thing to kind of think about as we are finishing up here before we start questions. An individual may be disabled in one environment, but not in another. Often it's not whether the person is disabled, but how disabling the environment is to that person. And so it comes back to some of that universal design concept of putting things into place in a way that are going to benefit not just the majority of people, but as many people as possible. And if we can hold that as one of our best practices as we consider, how we're putting things into place and how we're doing things, potentially we can eliminate some of that need for accommodations and remove those barriers for those who may experience them. One example would be ADA law requires that on doors outside of our offices, we put our door signs up with the numbers that are in Braille. But a lot of times the information about what's in that space isn't then relayed in the Brailing. If it's just numbers, it doesn't tell the individual what else might be there. So the signage outside the office may say, this is the Disability Services office, or who sits in that office. But if we don't include that in the Brailing, we're only giving part of the information. And so it creates a disabling environment just because we didn't provide that information in that format. So keeping those things in mind as we are going about our daily work to think about, is this accessible? And with that, here are a list of the resources that we used and mentioned during the session today. And I believe that we can provide the slides if you are needing them, but we can also send this out in our chat so that you can access those links as well. Now it's time for questions and answers, and to just say a little thank you for everyone for being here. Do we have questions in the chat?
You do have one in the chat. Are you consulted during design and planning of new construction projects or updates to current space? That's
That's an excellent question. And for our campus, typically no.
That is also true for Anchorage.
At UAS, it is really improved. I know that they are doing some renovating, and I got a lot of emails about my input and when the meetings were. So I do think at UAS we're doing pretty good.
Any other questions?
I didn't type fast enough. Can I just ask it?
Sure. Hi, Kim.
Hi. I'm working with a student whose diagnosis is dyscalculia and ADHD. And she came to me very, very frustrated with one of the companion programs offered by the publisher company that was adopted in her class, and wanted an accommodation. And it truly sounded like just a poorly designed program that she didn't enjoy using. And we had a really good conversations about how could, if help me understand how this could be related to your disability so we can move forward. And she couldn't. So later I did look up ADHD and found that low frustration levels are part of that. So this could be related to disability. So now we have this particular student figured out in this particular situation, but my trouble comes with, I can't remove all frustration from the college environment. And that's not realistic, as lots of college students are frustrated with our processes. How do you navigate a line like that with what is a reasonable level of frustration when somebody's ability to tolerate frustration is lowered? I'm just kind of tiptoeing around this, and I don't know, just a conversation would be helpful, I think.
This is Jenny and Juno. I'll be interested to see what other DS folks think, but sometimes like we can't make the frustration go away, but we can accommodate the frustration. Like what happens when that student escalates to that frustrated level? Would we put breaks? Would we put clarification of instructions? I might schedule to meet with that student every couple of weeks to go over the syllabus and see where they are. I mean, you have a great point. Our system is frustrating. Again, I don't know if that's helpful, Kim, but kind of just thinking about what happens when the student is in that frustrated state and what can we do to support them and at least make it so they can access their classes. We're not going to make the frustration go away, but how do we deal with that frustration?
Yeah, that does help. It feels like I'll be tiptoeing around this one for a while.
It sounds complex.
And trying to decide if it's disability or college. And just having to re-navigate each situation as it comes up, and figuring it's the reasonable part of what is reasonable there that is so gray in this particular instance, and I've never tiptoed around it before. So
it's a great example. And, it kind of reminds me of, I don't know if I articulated it very well when I was talking about the nuts and bolts, but we do have to be careful, DS professionals, that we are accommodating a disability and not a preference. And I think that's what Kim's kind of getting at with the frustration. And that can be really hard. And almost everything we do is very gray.
I have another question in the chat, Amber from Faith. What about accommodations granted at one UA school, but the student is taking classes at more than one UA school? I've been told that they are not transferable. Will this change in the future?
So yes, they are transferable, and they have been for a while now. So if a student has a letter from one campus with accommodations, and they're taking classes at multiple campuses or other campuses that they don't have a letter at, we just need to connect with that student so that we know to write that letter. Once we find out that they are requesting that letter for the class on the other campus, we will reach out to the DS office where they are currently registered and have a letter to get the information about their accommodations. And then we will either write the letter from our campus, or we might reach out to the student to clarify how those accommodations are utilized on their campus or in their class, so that we can make sure that it works appropriately for the courses that they're taking at the other campus. But they're qualified for those accommodations on each of our campuses.
I think one important thing to note, this is Marissa at UAF, is that that's not automatic. So we try to communicate with each other or if we hear of a student, but really students, if they let us know, I'm taking a class at your campus, I have accommodations from UAA, what do I need to do? There has to be some notification from somewhere. It is not automatic.
Just a follow-up question on that. Does that extend to housing accommodations? Specific example would be a student who goes to UAS normally and has an accommodation for an ESA, but then comes to UAF to live in housing at UAF over the summer. There's no accommodation on file with UAF's residence life department or our disability services department. Is that transferable?
Yes, if it was approved on the other campus, it is transferable. We would get the documentation and the information from that campus and then verify that the documentation was recent enough according to what our standards are. So again, we might have a follow-up conversation with the student just to make sure that they understand what is expected as far as the documentation for our campus, but it is transferable.
Thank you.
And just to clarify, Bernadette typed in the chat about clarifying who's contacting who. It is the DSS coordinator on the campus that's contacting their faculty. So as a UAA director, I would not be emailing UAF faculty. I would email Amber and let her take care of the notification.
Good question, and thank you for clarifying, Ann.
So the next question is, what resources are available to share with students in regards to how to access your services? Do we have flyers and brochures that we can give out to students?
So I would say that our websites are probably our first and foremost best way to get that information to students and getting them connected with us. Our emails are a great way to communicate with us because depending on what's happening with COVID, people may be in or out of the office. So phones, while they're monitored, we may not be able to answer them as quickly, but email works wonderfully. And we do have, for UAF, we do have some flyers and information. So if you're on one of our campuses, we'd be happy to send you some materials that you could hand to students, because a lot of students do prefer that way of communicating and getting the information. So we can do that. Just let us know if that's something that you would like, and we can send some of those out.
UAA also has some materials that we can certainly send out, and our website's a wealth of information. If a student discloses to us but does not reach out to your office, can we forward the information to you? Twice I have students directly send medical records to me, and I'm not sure it's okay for me to forward those to the DS office.
Just curious where Selena works, what department she works in. I'm wondering if it's like in the registrar or something. It's a great question.
Hi, I work for the School of Education in Fairbanks. And
Okay.
Both cases, the student actually wasn't in Fairbanks and in a rural area. And so getting access to things is a little challenging for them just on that level. And then they send stuff directly to me. And for whatever reason, I cannot get them to reach out to the disabilities office. And I feel a little weird forwarding medical records.
Yeah, you know what I would recommend is asking the students permission to contact, to give disability services their contact information. I know some of our faculty and staff do that. They get permission, the student discloses that they have a disability, and they get permission from that student, like, hey, can I email Jenny in disability services and have her call you? And sometimes that helps for the students who just can't make that call. I know reaching out is really difficult for a lot of our students with anxiety. And that's probably what I would do, the medical records aren't really going to do our offices any good without a student, and so, I don't know exactly what you should do with those medical records, but directing them towards us. Does that help at all?
does. For some reason, some people just won't reach out to the disabilities office, and I'm
Yeah.
not sure why, but
Yeah. Yeah, do you think
So-
they would be open to us reaching out to them if you got permission? Just saying, hey, can I give your number to Amber and she'll give you a call next week?
they might.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing we could do, Selena, is we can come by and pick up that paperwork if it's been like mailed to you, if it's in an email format. You know, again, getting the students' permission to forward that to our office, if that was their reasoning for sending it to you. And maybe do kind of a gentle handoff where you include the student in the email to us to say, you know, student, you know, I'm forwarding this information. Let me introduce you to our DS staff, and they'll work with you from here on out to put accommodations in place for your classes. And reminding the students too that if they're sending their documentation to a faculty member or, you know, to a department, they may get accommodations or some sort of a flexibility with that instructor or in that program. But we want it to be consistent through all of their classes because they're probably experiencing similar barriers in a variety of their classes. And the way to do that is truly to work through our office so that we can put those accommodations into place, and then that can be shared out with all of their faculty.
Okay,
So
thank you.
We're happy to, yeah, and even if you have somebody that, you know, wants to meet in person, but they don't want to come to our offices, we're happy to come to an office. We're happy to meet with, you know, outside of our space necessarily, just even for an initial, you know, introduction, so that they can put a face to the place and the department and feel a little more comfortable talking with us.
Thanks.
Mhm. Good question. Thank you.
I have another question from Kim about IEPs with no testing information and a diagnosis of non-specific learning disability and how we handle those.
I think that might be a question to follow up on to get a little more information, but we would potentially, if the IEP doesn't have a diagnosis on it, it essentially just gives us some information about what the accommodations were that were in place for that student in high school, and might help us in our conversation about what accommodations would work in college for them. But other than that, it's not extremely helpful. If they have a written diagnosis of a non-specified learning disability, then it's really a conversation with the student about what they experience at that point. You know, where some of those struggles might be for them, or what barriers are in place, and talking about how we potentially reduce those barriers or remove them for them. So if they have something in writing from a qualified provider with a diagnosis, then we will take that and learn more from the student about what they're experiencing.
Susan also asked, do students who've received accommodations get an email reminder for the upcoming semester? At UAA, we remind people in the fall, sometimes in between fall and spring, but always in the fall. So I don't know, I'm not sure, Amber, Jenny, what happens at your campuses?
At UAS, we do email students each semester for reminders.
And at UAF, we do as well. And we'll even include students who have used services like within the last two or three semesters, because they may have not taken classes this semester, but it's a good reminder to say, hey, don't forget, if you're registering for classes for spring, you know, now's the time to request, once you're registered, request your letter, and we'll get that in place for you for the semester. So we definitely send those reminders.
Another question is, what happens if a student changes a course? Does the new faculty member receive an email? So I was thinking about that while I was reading it, and I was thinking, if the student tells us that they changed courses, then yes, but they don't always tell us.
And so for UAF, the way that we distribute our letters, we send them directly to the student. And the student then determines which faculty they're going to share that letter with. So as if they change classes, they would have the letter available to provide to the new instructor.
And UAAs we use an online system called AIM, and the student has to log in and select the courses that they want accommodations for. So if they changed courses, they would have to log in and make those changes themselves.
At UAS, our office emails the faculty. The student would have to notify us if they changed classes. And we have purchased the AIM system that UAA uses, but we haven't implemented it yet. So things will be changing at UAS in the next 18 months.
And a comment from Bernadette, I just want to make sure that we comment on it as well, that in terms of sharing information, the DS offices can share student information without the written permission of a student.
But if a department is sending the information to DS, as was the question earlier from Selena, then what we'll want to do is the department should make a note that permission was given by the student for it to be shared, the information that they had sent to be shared with our office. And just have it there, maybe even as an email chain, per permission from the student, I'm forwarding this information over to you, something along those lines. Just so if there's any question, it's covered when we come back to it, at some point later down the road, but and we can all remember what's going on. Do we have any other questions? All right. I think that's probably everything. So thank you everyone for attending. We encourage you to sign up for other sessions during the mini conference that we're doing this week and next. And our next session is at 10:45 this morning. We're going to be talking about accommodations and fundamental alterations and kind of exploring what might constitute a fundamental alteration in various classes. So Anne will be presenting that for us, and we're looking forward to that. So thank you again, everyone, and please be watching for that survey. We'll come to your email and fill that out for us and give us some feedback on the session today. And we really appreciate everyone participating and being here with us this morning. So thank you so much.